She never talked to anyone down. She froze up there. My father-in-law said that into a microphone. 300 people heard him say it. I was standing at the back of the hall in uniform on my break. He owned the flight school on our field. When Roy Vance talked, the county listened. To understand how I got there, I have to go back. That fall, I turned 46. I'd worn a headset for 22 years by then. I talk on a radio in a glass box. That's the whole trade. I never pretended it was more. My husband's people were Vance's. So to that airport, I was Mrs. Vance. Mrs. Vance who answers the radio. Mrs. Vance who married Cal. Nobody out there called me by a rank. Nobody out there knew I had one. Here's the story the field believed about me. 3 winters back, one of Roy's little training planes came home on a single engine. It was a bad night, cold and black, with low clouds sitting right down on the runway lights. There was a young pilot up there alone, and one propeller had gone still. And after that night, the story went, I lost my nerve. I went quiet on the frequency. I washed out of the tower. None of it was true. But I stopped correcting people. You learn that early in this job. You don't argue on frequency. You do the next right thing. You let the machine keep the tape. You could tell them, Cal said to me once in our kitchen. Tell them what I said. What really happened up there? The truth of it. I wiped the same clean spot twice. I didn't look at him. It's on a drive, in a box somewhere, I said. Let it stay in the box. I believed that. I believed it would stay there until I died. I was wrong about the box. I was wrong about a lot that year. Here's the thing about a control tower. It forgets nothing. And it forgives nothing. Every word you say into that microphone gets written down. A machine listens the whole shift. It doesn't care who your father is. It doesn't care whose name is painted on the flight school. I'd known that for 22 years. I just didn't know the machine had outlived the lie. Let me tell you how Roy came to own the story. He'd run Vance Aviation for 30 years. He taught half the pilots in the county. He was loud, and he was liked, and he was used to being right out loud. When Roy told you a thing, you believed it. Everyone around you already did. He never wanted his son to marry a woman in a uniform. A tower controller, he said at our engagement dinner. He smiled the whole time. Well, somebody's got to answer the phone up there. The table laughed. Cal laughed. I laughed too. That's what you do. I let it go. I let a lot of things go with Roy for Cal's sake. You have to understand what Roy was on that field. He'd soloed most of the men in that county. I taught your instructor's instructor, he liked to say. People owed him and people loved him, and both things made him loud. A man like that doesn't lie exactly. He just believes his own story harder than you believe the truth. He decided early that his son had married down. It's a fine little job for now, he told Cal once, right in front of me. She'll want something softer when the babies come. There were never any babies. I never wanted softer. He just never thought to ask. What is it you actually do up there? He said to me once at Thanksgiving. You answer the radio that's the size of it. That's the size of it, I said. It was easier than the truth. Then came the night with a single engine. The pilot was one of Roy's students. A kid named Aaron, 20 years old. First solo cross-country at night, and proud as a rooster about it. He lost his right engine 40 miles out. He turned for the only lights he knew. I was the only controller in the cab that night. I'll tell you the whole 13 minutes later. Right now what matters is the next morning. Because the next morning, Roy told a different version, and his version is the one that stuck. By noon the next day, the whole field knew a Vance plane had limped home in the dark. And by noon, Roy had already decided who the hero was. It wasn't me. My instructor talked that boy down. Roy said in the pilot lounge. Coffee in his hand, a crowd around him. Had a handheld radio out in his truck, guided him the whole way in. People nodded. They always did. Roy said it, so it was true. Somebody turned to me. You were up there that night, weren't you, Mrs. Vance? I was, I said. Bet you were glad Roy's guy had that handheld. We were all glad it ended well, I said. It was the truest thing I could say without starting a war. I was standing right by the coffee machine. I heard every word. I opened my mouth. Then I closed it. Because here's a thing nobody warns you about. Being right isn't the same as being believed. And in that lounge I could see it plain. There was no daylight between Roy's story and the truth. Not in one face there, but mine. So I poured my coffee. I said nothing. I went back up to work my shift. Fear went through me that morning. Not the kind you'd think. Not fear of the airplane. That was over, and Aaron was safe. It was fear that a lie could set that fast and that hard, and that I'd be trapped inside it for good. You should say something, a younger controller told me that week. Denny, his name was, barely 25, good ears, steady hands. Say what? I asked. That it was you, on the radio. Everybody thinks it was Roy's guy in a truck. Let them think it, I said. But Miss Birdie, it isn't true. I heard it come through the speaker. I turned and looked at him. Denny, you'll learn this. Sometimes the truth just has to wait for a better day. I didn't know how long a wait I'd signed us up for. 3 years. That's how long it waited. 3 years of Roy telling that story. At every fish fry. At every hangar dance. Fattening it up a little each time. His instructor got braver. The weather got worse. And me, I got smaller. The worst of it came at the fall hangar dance. I heard a woman behind me feeling sorry for me. That's the one who cracked up in the tower, she said. Married a Vance, poor thing. He must feel awful for her. She didn't know I was standing right there. I turned around and smiled and refilled her punch. Because what else do? You don't argue at a dance any more than on a frequency. I drove home early that night and sat in the dark. Cal found me at the table with my coat still on. She went white as a sheet, he started saying. Locked right up. My guy had to save the day. That part about locking up was new. And that part was a knife. Because I hadn't frozen. I'd worked the hardest 13 minutes of my life alone in the dark, and my only proof sat on a shelf nobody could open. There was one man who tried to help me early. Aaron himself. The kid came back to fly again that spring. He walked up to me on the ramp, hat in his hands. Ma'am, it was your voice that night, he said. I know it was. I keep telling folks. I appreciate that, Aaron, I said. But Mr. Vance keeps saying it was his instructor, and it's his school. So they believe him, not me. It's all right, I told him. You just keep flying safe. That's how you thank me. He didn't like it. But a 20-year-old kid can't outshout a man like Roy. Nobody could. The story cost me more than my pride that winter. The day shift chief job came open, and it was mine by seniority. I'd trained half the crew who'd report to it. Then the manager gave it to a controller 10 years younger. He called me into his office to tell me himself. He couldn't quite look at me while he said it. It's not about your boards, he said. Your boards are the best I've got. Then what's it about? I asked. He shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling. There's talk you had a rough night once, he said. I can't seat a chief the field doesn't trust. I didn't argue. I'd stopped arguing years before. I thanked him and went back up to my boards, but I sat in my truck a while first. Shame sat on my chest like a wet coat. Roy's story had climbed inside the tower now. It wasn't just diner talk anymore. It was taking bread off my table. Even the diner got in on it. Heard you had a scare up there, a mechanic said one morning, friendly as anything. Roy says you handled it fine, considering. Considering what? I said. You know, nerves. Happens to the best of us. It sure does, I said. I paid for my coffee and left. Considering. That one word followed me around for 3 years. Cal heard the stories too. My own husband. Is any of it true? He asked me one night. His voice was quiet, not cruel, just worn out. The part about you freezing. What do you think? I said. I think my father likes an audience, Cal said. But, Bertie, he sounds so sure. That was the worst part. Roy sounded sure, and I sounded like a wife defending her pride. My stomach dropped that night sitting on the edge of the bed. Because I understood something ugly. If a story gets told loud enough, long enough, even the people who love you start to lean toward it. Not because they're weak. A loud story fills a whole room. A quiet truth just doesn't. I could have made noise. I chose not to. I kept my clearances clean. My voice level. My mouth shut. And the shelf kept its secret in the dark. Here's what was on that shelf. Our tower is a federal contract tower. That means a private company runs it, not the government. The company keeps its own logs, its own tapes, its own archive of every shift. Everything said on our frequency gets written to a voice recorder. Every hour of every day. For years it wrote to an old machine, a boxy gray thing. It saved the audio onto a hard drive the size of a brick. Then, a couple years before Aaron's night, the company upgraded. New recorder, new format. The old brick drives got pulled, labeled, and boxed. Nobody threw them out. But nobody could open them either. There wasn't a machine left in the building that could open the old format. So the night I talked Aaron down, my voice went onto one of those bricks. And that brick went in a box, in the back storage room, behind the fire extinguishers, under a shelf of dead monitors. 3 years it sat there. In the dark, 200 feet from where Roy told his story. I knew it was in there. I never went looking. What was the point? You can't play a drive no machine can open. And here's the piece I need you to hold on to. Nobody deleted that tape. Nobody hid it. Nobody wiped it. Nobody in that family ever touched it. It just sat on old media the years had walked past. I want to be clear about that. This wasn't a file somebody erased and somebody clawed back. Nobody erased anything. The recording never left the company's hands. It was never on a home computer. It was never in Roy's reach, not for a second. It was only ever waiting for the right machine. And that fall, the right machine walked in the door wearing a supervisor's badge. His name was Marion Tuck. He came in as our new watch supervisor, the facility manager for the tower. 30 years in the business, a tight cab and a tighter tongue. Marion didn't know me from anyone at first. To him, I was just a controller on the midnight shift, steady and quiet and good on the boards. But Marion had ears everywhere. The good supervisors do. Within a month, he'd heard the Vance story at the airport diner. Same as everyone else. Somebody told me you washed out, he said one slow night. Plain as that. The two of us watching an empty pattern. That's the story, I said. I didn't ask about the story. I asked if it's true. Does it matter now? I said. He was quiet a while. Then he said a thing I didn't expect. It matters to me, Marion said. I don't run a cab on stories, Mrs. Vance. I run it on tape. I didn't answer. I didn't dare hope. Hope gets expensive when you've gone 3 years without it. But Marion was already thinking about that back room. He wasn't a man who let a thing go. The next week, he pulled the paper strip log from Aaron's night. The flight progress strips. The little slips where a controller writes down every airplane, every clearance by hand in ink as it happens. Aaron's strip was right there in the file. The emergency was written on it, and my initials were in the corner where the working controller signs. Not Roy's instructor. Not a radio in a pickup truck. My initials in my hand in the cab. You worked this, Marion said, holding it up to the light. I worked it, I said. That's your mark in the corner. Nobody else's. Nobody else's, I said. Then there's a tape. There's always a tape. There's a drive, I said, and nobody here can play it. He looked at me a long moment. Then he smiled just a little, the way a man smiles when he's found a problem he likes. You leave that part to me, he said. I'd love to say I felt hope right then. I didn't. What I felt was afraid, because a lie that's lived 3 years grows deep roots. And I wasn't sure the truth had the strength to pull them up. I told Cal about it that night at the table. I kept my voice flat, so I wouldn't hope out loud. Marion found my initials on the strip, I said. He wants to pull the old tape. Cal set his fork down slow. Can they even do that? He asked. Denny thinks so, if he can find a machine. Cal was quiet a moment, then he reached over and covered my hand with his. I should have believed you from the start, he said. You believed me enough to stay, I said. That counted for a lot. He didn't sleep much that week either. I'd wake and find his side of the bed cold. He'd be at the window, looking out toward the field. Both of us were waiting on a dead drive to speak. Marion put young Denny on it. The same Denny who'd told me to speak up 3 years back. The old system wrote to those brick drives, Denny told him. We boxed them all when we upgraded. Can you open one? Not with anything we own. I'd have to track down an old reader. Then track one down, Marion said. Money's not the problem here. Time is. It took them a week. Denny hunted down an old brick reader from a company out east. He drove 2 hours each way to buy it in a parking lot. Then he called me from the storage room. I've got the drive, he said. Right where you left it, behind the extinguishers under the dead monitors. 3 years of dust on it. About that. I'm wiping it off now. Will it spin, Denny? We're about to find out. Say a prayer. It spun. Denny called me from the parking lot when it first spun up. Miss Birdie, he said, and his voice cracked. It plays. The whole drive plays. You're sure it's the right night? I'm looking at the date stamp now. It's yours. I sat down on the tower steps and held the phone. I didn't say anything for a while. You still there? He asked. I'm here, I said. I'm just listening to my own heartbeat. It's all here, Miss Birdie, he told me the morning it came off. His hands were shaking a little. Every frequency, every night on that drive. Yours too, clear as a bell. Play it back for me, I said. You sure you want to hear it? Play it, Denny. And right there, in that little equipment room on a plain Tuesday morning, I heard my own voice climb out of a 3-year-old night. It was calm. It was level. A little lower than I remembered. Turn left, heading 270. I've got you, buddy. I've got you. I had to sit down. Hearing it brought the whole night back at once. Aaron's voice had been climbing toward panic. I'd cleared every other plane out of his way. There was a regional jet on final, and I sent it around. I kept my own voice slow because I knew he'd match it. That's the trick nobody prints in the manuals. A scared pilot flies the voice in his ears. So you hand him a calm one and let him fly that. I talked him through the checklist while my hands went cold. I watched his little dot crawl toward the runway. And I didn't breathe right until his wheels were down. 13 minutes. It had felt like a whole winter. Relief washed over me first. Then right behind it, grief. Grief for 3 years I'd spent letting a loud man be the hero of my worst night. Denny didn't say a word. He just let it run. Somebody's going to say we faked this, I told Marion. They'll say the tape was cooked up. Let them, Marion said. Then let them explain the strip log. What if Roy says it was erased and put back? Denny actually laughed at that. Nobody could erase this if they tried, he said. It was never on a computer anybody could reach. It sat on our shelf on our drive in our building. We didn't restore a thing, Marion said. Nothing was ever gone. We just found a machine old enough to play it. That mattered to me more than they knew. There was no missing file here, no villain who deleted it and no hero who saved it. There was just a company that keeps its own tapes and time, and a locked-up format nobody had bothered to open. The truth hadn't been rescued. It had only been switched back on. Then Marion did the careful part. The part that turns a tape into a fact. He lined the audio up against the paper strips, minute by minute, second by second. A voice by itself a man can argue with, he told me. A voice that matches the log tick for tick, nobody argues with that. He was right. That's proof no story can bend. Retimed and matched, he said when it was done. Every call in this tape lands where the strip says it should. This isn't your memory, Mrs. Vance. This is the field's own written log. He turned and looked at me. Now, do you want the world to hear it? I thought about Cal. I thought about Roy. I thought about 300 people with chicken on their plates. I don't need the world, I said. I just need it to stop. Then it stops, Marion said. You have my word. And then he told me where. The airport threw a safety awards banquet every fall in the big terminal hall. Everybody came. The pilots, the mechanics, both flight schools, the county. Roy always had a table right up front. Marion had been asked to say a few words that year. About tower operations. I'll play it there, he said. In front of all of them at once. My mouth went dry. Marion, that's Roy's crowd, I said. That's his whole world in one room. That's exactly why, Marion said. A story like his dies in the room where it was born. Or it doesn't die at all. I didn't sleep much that week. The night of the banquet, I was on the midnight shift, which meant I'd be up in the cab, in my uniform, working traffic while 300 people ate dinner 200 yards away. That was on purpose. Marion set the schedule himself. He didn't want me sitting at a table, waiting, sick to my stomach through the speeches. He wanted me working, doing the thing they said I couldn't do. Take your break at 8 sharp, he told me. Walk over, stand in the back. That's all you have to do. Just stand there. So at 8, I handed the boards to Denny. I came down the long tower stairs, and I crossed the dark, cold ramp toward the terminal. That walk across the ramp is a short one. It felt a mile long that night. The wind came straight off the runway and cut through my jacket. The terminal windows glowed gold up ahead. I could see the shapes of 300 people inside. My whole married life was in that room. My husband, his father, the men who'd passed me over. I almost turned back twice. I kept walking because Marion had asked me to, and because a small, stubborn part of me wanted to be there. Not to gloat, just to stand inside my own life for once. I'd been absent from it long enough. I could hear the banquet before I saw it. Silverware laughter and Roy's big voice riding over the top of it up on the little stage. I slipped in the back door. I set my shoulders against the wall. And that was the moment Roy leaned into the microphone and told the whole room one more time about the night his brave instructor talked a crippled plane down. Some folks up in that tower, he said, warming to it, just aren't built for the hard nights. One of 'em locked up solid, couldn't say a word. My guy carried the whole thing. He didn't know I was there. He never looked to the back. Then Marion Tuck stepped up beside him. He asked, real polite, if he might add one thing for the folks. "Course you can," Roy said, grinning wide. "Set 'em straight, Marion. Go on." I have never watched a man hand another man a rope and call it a favor. Marion didn't hurry. That was his way. He set his coffee down and took the podium like he had all night. The room settled the way a room does when it feels something coming. Roy sat back down at his front table, still smiling, arms crossed. His instructor sat beside him, the man from the story. I watched that man's face more than Roy's. He wasn't smiling. He knew what was on that tape, even if Roy didn't. Most of you know me, Marion started. I run the tower. I don't tell stories. I keep tape. A few people laughed, easy and unaware. There's a night that gets told a lot around here, he went on. The night one of Roy's planes came home on one engine. I want to play you what actually went out over the frequency. Roy's smile held, but it stopped reaching his eyes. It's just static, Marion, he called out. Old junk. It's not static, Marion said. We cleaned it up and timed it to the log. Every word lands. The instructor beside Roy shifted in his chair. Nobody else moved. Marion set a small speaker on the podium. He had a laptop. He tapped it twice with one finger. This is the tower tape from that night, he said to the quiet hall. It's never been played outside this building. We pulled it off the old system last week. We matched every word to the written log. It all lands where it belongs. So just listen for a minute. And then the whole room heard the night. They heard a young pilot, scared half to death, breathing fast and ragged. Harmon Tower, I've lost the right engine. I've lost it. I'm coming back. And then they heard a woman's voice answer him. Steady and warm, not a shake in it anywhere. Roger that. Turn left heading 270. I've got you. You're not alone up there, you hear me? Tower, say again the heading. 270. Nice and easy, nothing sudden. Talk to me now. What's your altitude, honey? 2,000. Coming down. That's good. That's just right. Bring her down slow. I'll be right here the whole way. 300 people sat dead still. Nobody touched a fork. There was no handheld radio in a truck on that tape. There was no instructor. There was one steady voice in the dark, keeping a scared boy alive, one call at a time, all the way down to the numbers. Marion let it run to the very end, to the part where the wheels chirped down, where Aaron said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," and the woman's voice came back gentle and said, "Easy now, roll it out slow, you did the hard part." Then Marion switched off the speaker. The hall was so quiet, I could hear the coffee urns ticking. Roy got to his feet at his table. That could be anybody's voice, he said, but it came out thin. It surely could, Marion answered. Except the log says who was in that chair. He let those words sit there a moment. Then he turned back to the room. The controller you just heard, Marion said, is on the midnight shift tonight, working your traffic in that tower right now. On her break, standing at the back of this room. In the Air National Guard, she holds the rank of technical sergeant. Her name is Vance. Every head in that room turned around, and they found me against the back wall in my uniform. No table, no plaque, no award, and not one word ready to say. Roy Vance stood at that podium with his mouth open, and no story left in it. I didn't gloat. I need you to know that. I didn't feel one flash of triumph. What I felt was quieter and stranger. I felt seen. For the first time in 3 years, a whole room was looking at the truth instead of the noise. And the truth wore my voice. Cal reached me first. He came off his chair. He crossed the whole hall. He put his hand on my arm. "That was you," he said. His eyes had gone wet. "That was you the whole time." "It was always me, Cal," I said. He didn't say he was sorry out loud. He didn't have to. His whole face said it for him. Roy came last. He came the slow way a big man comes when the air's gone out of him. Small now, careful with his feet. "I didn't know," he said to me. "You never asked," I said. Not angry, just true. He looked at the floor. Then he looked at his son. Then he walked out the side door. And for the first time in 30 years, Roy Vance didn't have a thing to say. I didn't chase him. Whatever fell on Roy that night, he'd built it himself, brick by brick, one telling at a time. I never had to lift a hand. The tape did it. The truth did it. All I ever did was keep my voice level and wait for the machine. Then I went back and finished my shift. That's the part nobody puts in a story like this. There were still airplanes in the pattern. They had no idea a banquet had ever happened. They needed a controller in that cab. So I climbed the long tower stairs one more time. I took the boards back from Denny, and I worked traffic until 2 in the morning, same as every other night of my life. Later, when the pattern went empty, I came down the stairs and walked out onto the ramp. The tower rose up dark behind me. The terminal lights were down to a hum. I stood out there alone in my uniform, with my headset still in my hand, hanging loose at my side, and I looked out over a field that had at last actually heard me. I wasn't crying. I was just level. The way you get when a long shift and a long 3 years end on the same night. I stayed out on that ramp longer than I should have. The cold felt clean after all those years of noise. Out past the fence, the lot sat empty now. Roy was long gone, driving home with nothing to say. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel glad either. I just felt still all the way down. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't anything special. I'm a woman who talks on a radio in a glass box. But that night, on that catwalk, the glass box felt like the tallest place in the county. The rest came slow, the way real things do. Roy never told the freezing story again. Not once. He didn't stand up and apologize to a crowd either. That was never his way. But that spring, a new little sign went up over the door at Vance Aviation. Small letters right under the family name. Safe pilots are made on the ground and saved in the air. He never said who taught him that. He didn't have to. We drove home together after my shift ended. The sun was coming up gray over the hangars. "You worked all night," Cal said. "After all that." "The planes didn't know about the banquet," I said. He laughed and then he got quiet. "I spent 3 years half believing him," he said. "I'll spend the rest making that right." "You already started," I told him. "You crossed the whole room. Cal and I are still married. Better now than we were." He learned something that night about which voice to trust. It was never the loudest one. Denny made supervisor himself 2 years later. He keeps that old gray brick reader in a drawer in the cab now, cleaned up and working. Just in case some other quiet truth is sitting on some other dead drive, waiting on its own better day. I taught him that much. He taught himself the rest. Marion Tuck retired the next summer. At his going away, he pressed one thing into my hands. That gray brick drive. The one from Aaron's night. "This one's yours," he said. "Nobody should ever lose your voice again." It sits on a shelf in my house today. I can't even play it anymore. That's fine by me. I know exactly what's on it. Aaron came to see me a few weeks after the banquet. He flies big jets out on the coast now. He found me on the ramp, hat in his hands, same as before. "They believe me now," he said, "about whose voice it was." "They believe the tape," I told him. "That's better than me." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I flew home that night on your voice. I've never once forgotten the sound of it." We stood and watched a plane come in. Neither of us said much. He'd carried the truth of that night longer than anyone but me. Some debts don't get paid in words. He'd paid his anyway just by coming. Here's what I know now after all of it. The truth doesn't need you to shout it from a stage. It only needs to survive long enough to be heard. Sometimes it sits 3 years in a box behind the fire extinguishers, 200 feet from the lie, waiting on the right machine and the right night. I used to think being right would be enough. It never is not on its own. Being right only means you get to wait. What you really need is for the proof to outlast the lie. Mine did by a couple of feet and a couple of years. And sometimes, the quietest person in a loud room is the one whose voice was holding everything up the whole time. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who's tired of being the quiet one in a loud room. And if you'd like to stay for the next one, I'd be honored to have you along.